it was not earned or deserved what I had experienced at Disney. But when I sought out God and what I felt like He was calling me to do, I saw a bigger purpose in all that. I felt strongly that God had brought me to Disney and given me that success so that I could step away from it.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. My guest today is Tony Bancroft, the man with a hand in making many of your favorite childhood movies, from Lion King to Mulan. Tony lets us see behind the scenes in the world of animation. He also tells us what his work has taught him about human behavior, failure, and God's presence in the entertainment industry. So I'm so glad to have Tony Bancroft, my brand new friend. We've been friends for 7 minutes now.
Yay!
My brand new friend, who is a professor at Azusa Pacific University, a 2D and then 3D animator, a host of a podcast, a movie director for Disney, drew some of the most beloved characters in Disney's history in his earliest stages of life, started a company that was off to a great start and then failed because the market was against him. A man of parts. We're so glad to have you here today, Tony.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. I almost cried a little bit when you gave me that intro, so I appreciate it.
Why did you almost cry?
I guess curious. It was the when you got to the studio and company that I started that failed. There's still some hurt there, just from an ego standpoint. Yeah, but it needed to happen for God to take me to what came next and where I am now. So
well, one of the things I loved about your story, and I wasn't planning on starting in the middle, but you say in one of your podcasts that that venture, which failed in the end because of market forces, I mean, it wasn't your fault in some narrow sense,
right,
gave you an opportunity to do all sorts of things that you never would have done otherwise and opened many doors.
It really did. And I think that's the wonderful thing about 2020 hindsight and how God works in such an amazing way. You start to see His hands on the road of your life, in that even in that failure, and I was doing something, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into it later, but I was doing something that I really felt led by God to do, to start that animation company. And it was a faith-based, Christian-based company, and we were producing, cartoons for the faith-based market. And then to move to a point of it failing and us not being able to provide for our families anymore and having to make some tough choices was really hard. But then, being where I'm at now, or even 10 years after it happened, being able to see that there was purpose. There was a greater purpose. Yeah. In that failure, in that moving forward. And I've learned so much from it. I've grown from it, and I've used that knowledge to have more successes and better successes, I think.
A lot of times Christians will say that the worst thing that happened to them was the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yeah.
Because of what they learn and how they grow through it. But you're not a stranger to difficulty. You grew up in a home, if I can go in that direction. We'll do your history a tiny bit.
Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, you did grow up without a lot of money, right?
Yeah, single parent, 3 kids, it was tough, but we didn't, that's the great thing about parents oftentimes, and my mom was just a peach in that way, because she shielded us from all of that. We only remember, and it's funny, we kids get together and we talk about our past, and we don't realize how poor we were. Mm-hmm. It's not until my mom said, we almost didn't have Christmas that year. And yet it was like, we have the fondest memory of our Christmas,
Yes, right. But when you were a kid, this does lead to your story. When you were a kid, you and your brother, you have a twin brother who's also an animator, identical twins. Sure seems like it anyway. So you and your brother grew up just drawing and drawing and drawing, and you got into the school of your dreams. And then you ran out of money and you had to do something, and you ended up at Disney. That's the thumbnail sketch. But walk us through how you got to Disney and got to do these awesome things. I mean, I told my granddaughter, I'm going to talk to the guy who drew Pumba in The Lion King. Her eyes got big,
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I still have people coming up to me, including my students, that said, "Oh, you created my childhood," and that's intimidating. And hopefully they're sane and good people. But yeah, I don't take credit for all that. It's Disney, the big Disney thing. Anyway, to answer your question, Tom and I grew up always loving to draw. And as twins, twins can either be one of two things. They can either want to be individuals and not want to talk to each other and really be, apart from each other, or they could be the best of friends. And that was my brother and I, Tom and I, still to this day. We love each other, but we're each other's best friends. We want to hang out all the time. We had all the same interests growing up: comic strips, comic books, you name it, all the geeky stuff at the time. Now it's like taking over the world. But
right.
At the time, that was the super geeky stuff that we were into, is comics. And we drew every day. And we were, just like the Bible talks about how iron sharpens iron, that was Tom and I. We would be critical and competitive with our drawing, just like most brothers were with football or some other sport. And we were very unsporty type guys. So we really threw ourselves into art at an early age, drawing cartoons, wanting to do a comic strip. And that led to finding out about Cal Arts, which is the college that you were referencing before. And Cal Arts is one of the most expensive schools, private schools for animation. And at the time, it was the top one and almost the only one in all of the United States. There was another one in Canada. So when we decided we really wanted to do that, we told our mom, and she was a little stressed, but she's such a great supportive mom. She wanted to see our dreams come true. She knew that we were all in on wanting to do animation. So she found a way to get us through, at least through the first year. And she had just married my stepdad at the time, who didn't have any really responsibility over us as adult males, and yet he doubled down and put some savings took savings out of his own savings so that he could pay for our first year of school. And I will always remember him.
Yeah,
such a gift, and neither earned nor deserved. But it was because of that we were able to get through the first year. And it was the second year that became the difficult one. We had summer jobs, and it gave us just enough between what my mom had left in her savings and then the summer jobs that Tom and I took on. We were able to pay for the first semester of that second year. And thank
then
God,
you auditioned.
Yes, thank God Disney came looking to hire interns. And this was our way in, internship at Disney Feature Animation. It was a dream come true. But we were sophomores at the time, and only halfway through our sophomore year, and they were only looking at junior and senior portfolios. So they didn't want to, take kids from, midway through their program. They were looking for people that were going to graduate pretty soon or something like that. So mostly seniors. And so we begged the guy that was there looking at portfolios from Disney, and a guy that I later became very good friends with, and he became a mentor figure to both Tom and I. But we were begging, please, you don't understand. If we don't get this opportunity to show our portfolios, we'll be at, Carl's Jr. or McDonald's next semester. Mm-hmm. We're not coming back. There's no coming back to show your portfolio later.
You're not taking away students from their junior year. You're not interrupting our education.
Right.
You're saving our lives.
Yeah, it's not going to hurt Cal Arts, because Cal Arts is already going to be hurt when we announce that we're not coming back, because we have no money for next year,
right,
or next semester. And thankfully, he did allow us to show our portfolio, and he liked it. He liked both of our portfolios. There was never a moment where, and I'm thankful for this too, that he had to make a choice, or Disney had to make a choice, like, well, we like one of you better than the other. And we never even conceived that Tom and I could be separated by one of us being rejected. And thankfully, we didn't have to worry about that, because not only did we get into Disney, but then after our internship, we both got jobs at the new Disney MGM Studios in Orlando. It was a theme park. And that was our first job at Disney, was being transported out to Orlando.
Yeah, and you rose through the ranks rapidly, if I can just summarize it. I'll summarize it, and I want you to comment, all right?
Sure.
At this point. So, this is now you, not your brother. I'm not, because
right.
it's you. So
I'm
anyway,
here and he's not. Yeah.
You were doing background scenes in Beauty and the Beast. Be Our Guest, that magnificent scene. You were, very young. You worked on that. Very young. You got to draw the comical villain, I'm going to call him, Iago, in Aladdin.
Yep.
And then you got to draw Pumba, which, that's a pretty important character and a lot of comic relief and a fairly heavy, for Disney, movie. So you got like some comedy in there and a pretty expressive character, if I may say so.
Well, thank you. Yeah, animators can be typecast just like live action performers and actors. And back then we were cast by the director of the film based on our strong suits. And some animators are good with the female characters. I call them the girly men. And they would do the princesses and that sort of thing.
Right.
Some were really good with the villains. And for me, it was always, I was typecast as the comedy guy, which I loved.
Yeah, and also animals. You tended to do animals.
Yeah, and I love doing animals too, for sure. Talking animals and stuff like that.
Right.
And just finding the, anthropomorphic connection between, an animal and a human, where that soft point is, where they can be emotive like a human, have the personality of a human, or gesture like a human. Like getting a bird like Iago to articulate with the feathers to make it look like he's got hands and stuff.
Right.
That's the creative fun that I like to do.
He also lost a lot of feathers, I got to say.
He did.
A real bird would have been completely without feathers in a hurry.
I think he was molting.
Yeah, constantly. Like every 45 seconds, he would lose feathers. It seemed like
it's a cartoon. Nobody counts.
It is. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that I was upset about it.
Yeah. Dan, you're the only one that's like counting the feathers. That's not possible.
Yeah, exactly.
You're the guy in a Western that counts how many shots that the guy shot, right? He's got a 6-shooter, but he shot 8 times.
Exactly. But I will say that I would love for you to tell the story about your responsibility to draw a warthog that sings a love song written by Elton John that he called at one point his greatest melody ever. And then a raspy voiced warthog is singing the greatest love song he's ever written. And he wrote a lot of songs, by the way, and knows his way around a tune. He heard it and he said, "I quit. I'm out." Yeah, you had to talk him off the ledge.
He almost left the film, right? When and it was the director's choice. They wanted to make it. It was going to be a song between Simba and Nala, the two main lions, or at least playing over like a love scene between them.
Right.
And the directors felt like there needed to be some more comedy. They wanted to throw in Pumba and Timon into that, and had the brainstorm to have them sing the song. Or at least halfway through, they do their own reprisal of it, and kind of in a mock way. Yeah, and when Elton John first heard that, he was appalled.
I can imagine. I mean,
because Pumbaa's got that really grovelly voice. He's like, "Can you feel the love tonight?"
Our friend is through.
Yeah, that's right. And it was dissettling for poor Rocket Man that he was.
Yeah. I want to get to you as a director and what you had to go through in Milan in a second, but can you please tell me, you helped out with Aladdin.
Yep.
The first time I watched it, when my children were pretty little, I thought that the magic carpet, was more expressive than most humans. How on earth do you draw a magic carpet that with its tassels says things like me and sure, I'll help you, I'm on your side, I'm shy, now I'm bold, I've gained confidence because of the way, how do you do that?
In the grand tradition of Disney animation and animation in general, cartoonists and animators have been taking inanimate objects and bringing and anthropomorphizing them. Right. That's a big letter word for basically humanizing them, bringing human attributes to that. So, just like in Beauty and the Beast, I animated Cogsworth the clock. It's an inanimate clock, but we infuse a certain life to it and use the design to try and create arm shapes and things like that. Same thing for the carpet, and I'm glad you mentioned him because I didn't animate the carpet. It was a female animator named Ellen Woodbury, who was like one of the very first female animators. That's why I mentioned her sex, only because I think she deserves that kind of kudos. But she did a phenomenal job of bringing the carpet to life. And, using the tassels as hands and using the upper tassels as hands, the bottom tassels as feet, and then just trying to get, it's how you kind of warp. It's all about body posture a lot of times. If I arc my back and I create a line of action that is kind of sagging, then I look down. So it's looking at human behavior. That's what we do as animators. We look at human behavior and how do we caricaturize that human behavior using what we have in front of us, these designs that are usually objects or something else or an animal. How do we humanize them? And it usually comes back to body posture, trying to create hands and legs out of things that probably shouldn't be hands or legs.
Right.
And just caricaturizing as much as we can. So that we are keen observers of human behavior as animators.
Yeah, and we might say, because we're so accustomed to reading people and tiny gestures. For example, if you go to visit somebody, if you're not sure how it's going to go, you're looking for questions like, are they leaning toward me or a tiny bit away from me?
Exactly.
Is there a gleam in their eye or is a little bit of dead lid in their eye?
Yeah.
And when I walk into their office, do they stare at their computer screen for 1 second or 11 seconds?
Exactly.
And, that tells you the status of your relationship. And then you just put that onto a carpet or a clock or a candlestick, for goodness sakes.
But even down to, even as you're talking and saying those things, Dan, I'm looking at your body language and how you're fiddling with a pen or how you're gesturing with your hand. And you have a motion, a circular motion with your hand that usually is like, I'm listing something or I'm saying something that goes on and on. There's subconscious things that we do as we speak. And they all have a deeper subtext kind of context to what we're saying. We don't think about it oftentimes, but as animators, we are like actors with a pencil or with a computer, and we're always trying to see kind of the deeper meaning in physical actions that we do while we're talking. How do we use our hands and things like that?
So are you telling me that I should be as frightened of talking to you as I am frightened of talking to a psychologist? Because when I do this, you go, oh, he's going to make a list now. I hope you're picking up that I like you.
I'm not going to make a list. I'm going to make you into a cartoon character later. It'll be behind your back. You won't know what it is. But I don't know. I make you into a kitten or something. We'll see.
A kitten? That would be interesting. For what it's worth, this is immaterial almost, but I do have a daughter who's now an architectural designer, but she was a cartoonist for quite a while. And she still does it on the side for fun. So I'll ask her if she can make me into a lion if you make me into a kitten, all right?
All right. That'd be good. That'd be good.
This podcast is a production of the Center of Faith and Work in partnership with the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. If you're enjoying this conversation, you know the drill. Please rate this podcast and subscribe to it. And visit our workingwithdan.org site to get updates on new episodes, explore old episodes, hear clips from lectures on work, and enter to win our giveaways. As we jump back into this conversation with Tony, listen for his experience working within a team of creative artists. Tony has a gift for understanding people, to capture us in art, and to manage a workplace. He sees people's strengths and shortcomings and cultivates an environment where people can strive. How can you do the same in your workplace or your home? How does your work reflect God's ways? So you went from, at a very early age, you stressed on your podcast. Do you want to name your podcast? What's the name of your podcast?
Yeah, my twin brother Tom and I have a podcast called the Bancroft Brothers, very original title, the Bancroft Brothers Animation Podcast. And it is exactly what it is, which is Tom and I talk about our history and our past in animation, whether it be at Disney or other studios we worked at, talk about current animation, history of animation, all kinds of geeky, fun animation stuff.
Yeah, so on your podcast, the Bancroft Brothers Animation Podcast, you say you had great mentors and amazing opportunities, and you were the director on the animation side, I'm assuming not the voice side, co-director of Mulan. Pretty big movie.
Yeah.
May I say a beautiful movie?
I call it the OG Mulan because there is a live action Mulan that people might get it confused with. But this is the animated Mulan that came out in 1998, and I was the youngest director in Disney history. Yeah, so when they asked me to to do it I was 27. That's when I started. These movies take a long time though.
Yes.
Just so you know, Dan, it's a good 4-year adventure. And it certainly was for Mulan. Some take even longer to produce, believe it or not, but Mulan was 4 years. So I finished it and I was in my 30s, but I started when I was like 27, and boy, I did not know what to expect in that journey. It was a roller coaster ride, making Mulan. I loved it and I hated it some days. Yes. I mean, as any leader that's thrown into a big opportunity that is overwhelming, and which is what that was, there was more that I didn't know about directing than I did. And I found out very quickly there's no training for a Disney director. They don't have a shadowing program or anything where you shadow, another director or anything like that. It's kind of, you fall into it usually after you've been there for like 20 years or something.
Yes.
It's because you've developed a lot of experience over that 20 years that you might get into directing. But it was passed on to me, and I was asked to do it. Like I said, after 5 years at Disney.
That's very fast.
Yeah. And I learned so much from it. I actually wrote a book about directing for animation because I felt like I wanted to help others that maybe are, because like I said, there's no school you can go to. Right. There's not classes, unless there's some universities that have master classes or like a master's degree program or something. But usually it's really hard to find anything about training for directing. And it's the social skills, it's the organizational skills. It's not the art skills that are the big hang up for most directors. How do I get across, my passion and my ideas, my feelings about this story to a creative crew?
So can I just press into that a tiny bit, and then I will have a follow-up question. So that would include things like, I looked very carefully at your color palette on Mulan, and I really have to say I liked a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
I loved the blues and the greens and the grays, especially seemed just perfect. And maybe a little bit of debt to some anime type washes or something.
That's a good eye. Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of influences that went into it, but being a Chinese film or about a Chinese story and a Chinese girl, we looked at a lot of Asian. There was a lot of Asian influence in the art.
And so you had to convey that. You knew what you wanted, and you had to convey it. But I want to mix that. I'm going to let you comment, but I'm also going to mix that with something you said once. You said that, love, hate, Mulan. And at one point, you're very proud of it, did well, but you also said it didn't exactly turn out the way you wanted it to. And let me just say that that's an extremely common comment for people. Musicians, their greatest album or what could have been, but it wasn't quite. And they say, that album, it really wasn't what I wanted. And you think, well, you're the musician. How could it not be the way you wanted it to be? And I've written a bunch of books by now, and people say, oh, I like this book. And I go, well, I'm glad you did, because I kind of hated it by the end. And it somehow or other, although I'm just sitting there with a computer screen in front of me, it didn't take the shape I wanted. This book is not the book I wanted to write, and I couldn't get control over it again. How does that happen? I don't know. And others, they just fly off my fingers, and the draft is perfect, and it's just what I wanted to say. Yeah. And others are in between. So I think creative people, I'm not claiming to be creative in the way that you are at all, but that sentiment's or that reflection's reasonably common among creators. I think.
It really is. It is, and I've heard that so many times too. And and a lot of times it boils down to one very common thing, which is where our harshest critique or our harshest criticism comes from ourselves. We're never quite happy, and I think that's what makes somebody great in a lot of ways too. I've examined that my own self and tried to really think about what that is. We've talked about it on the podcast even, but I really think it is a drive for excellence that makes us unhappy. And I do think there's a bit of torture and agony in creating art because of that, because it's a little elusive. You don't really ever feel like it's totally finished, or that it's right, or maybe you've overworked it, and it's hard to put your finger on what that is, but it turns into a bit of disappointment. When it's not exactly what you think it could have been or should have been when you first had the inception. Yes,
what you saw in your mind, maybe in the morning or at night, you had the color there in your mind.
And yet, yet the audience, we both know this, is that, the audience, your readers of your books or the film goers that come to my movies, they don't know that. They don't know what our intention was. They only know what's on the big screen or printed between the binding. That's what they're judging, and they love it. They love it for whatever reason. It still has an impact. It still creates an emotional impact for them. That's what it's about, really.
Let me toss out a saying with regard to books. The saying is, no one ever finishes a book. They just stop writing.
Exactly. It's the same for a movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Literally at Disney, there's release dates that are set for a movie. Once it starts production, there's already a release date that's like 2 years away, and the clock is ticking. You have to have it done. There's so many financial and big money kind of things that are connected to that release date that you can't even fathom. And you don't want to know as the director. It causes too much pressure on your shoulders. Yeah. So thankfully, other people will have to worry about the marketing and getting it out and the synergies between the ride that's being built and all those kind of things at the same time that you're making the movie. Thankfully, we don't have to deal with that too much, but there's no turning back, and it has to be done. So you have to lay the pencils down at some point.
Yeah, that's important. Let me ask you a broad question. Suppose for a moment that there's somebody in the room who begged to get in here because they want to be an animator or director of shorts or whatever. What would you say to them? What is the aspect of leading a project? And that could be, leading a character like Simba or the carpet or Pumba, which is its own entity. I mean, folks, in case you don't know this, the cartoonists, the artists, the animators, they don't draw all the characters. It would take forever. Just
right.
We're assuming that. What would you say to somebody who would want to be a leader in developing a character, or even things like directing a whole movie? What's the biggest surprise? What would most surprise them about your work?
Well, that it's in the leadership capacity, you're not usually, there's a romantic side to being an artist when you first start, even working in a big system like Disney, where you can kind of shut the door and create an individual piece of work. When you're a director or a leader of a department or something like that, it's communal. You're engaging with other creatives and you're trying to express what you want, but also trying to be influenced by what they want to bring individually to that work. And knowing how, and it's no different really from being a manager at, Microsoft or something where you don't want to micromanage, you don't want to step in too much, you want to give people creative freedom. You should know strengths and weaknesses, not only personality, not only their art strengths and weaknesses, like, oh, this person's really good with foliage and painting colorful trees and things like that.
Right.
Whereas this person is better for cityscapes and stuff like that. You do need to know those things, but then on top of it, how do they react to criticism? How do they react to my giving my creative input on something or making changes?
Yeah. Are they grateful, thrilled? Oh my goodness, Tony came by and gave me a tip.
And some people are, and some people hate it.
Go away. Yeah. I don't want to hear it. I know what I'm doing.
Right, exactly. And and there's egos and there's prima donnas and all that happens in the art world too. So it really is knowing about how to engage people, how to manage people creatively, how to understand strengths and weaknesses. Those are the managerial things that seem kind of, lame and uninteresting, I think, for most artists. But that's what makes really great leaders, no matter where you are.
Yeah, good point. Because we don't have infinite time, we're gonna go to the fact that you and your brother both decided to leave Disney eventually. And, you were at the top of the world. People thought you were daft. To make an allusion to Daffy Duck, I guess.
Yeah, I thought you were going there.
Yeah.
Probably much more like Daffy Duck.
Well, at any rate, you did leave, and it had to do with something I've always noticed about, Disney's viewed as family friendly, but that doesn't mean it's a Christian firm at all, and it's not.
Right.
And as you and your brother said in one of your podcasts, Disney can be very open to every religion except Christianity at times.
Yeah. Sure.
At least it sure felt like that to you. And you decided you didn't want to give your life to that, and you wanted to give your life to something else.
Yeah, what happened was, like you said, I had gotten to a very high point really the highest creative station at Disney Feature Animation, which was being a director of a feature. There's really no higher than that. And I'd done it within 5 years. And I started to stand back after I finished Mulan. I had a bit of a break, and I started to really look at my life and really listen to God. I had gone through such an impactful time in those 4 years of making Mulan. Very stressful, lots of ups and downs. I had moved to Florida and then moved back to California with my wife. We had 3 kids at the time. 2 kids at the time. One was going to come a little bit later. But they were all, under the age of 4 or 5 at the time. So lots of high stress, lots going on. And it wasn't until after Mulan that things kind of slowed down that I could take a look at my life and try and make some sense out of what God had gifted me. And I do feel like, it was not earned or deserved what I had experienced at Disney. And trust me, I had friends that would tell me, this doesn't happen, what happened to you and these opportunities that have come your way. And I had to admit that it was perplexing. But when I sought out God and what I felt like he was calling me to do, I saw a bigger purpose in all that. And I realized that I felt strongly that God had brought me to Disney and given me that success so that I could step away from it, not be there and continue on into whatever else would come, but to step away from it, that he had more for me to do. And what led to what I felt called to was starting an animation company using the talents and abilities that he'd give me, but directly in the purpose of faith-based entertainment, more educational for kids. And VeggieTales had just come out a couple years before that, before I left Disney. Huge success, and I thought that's what we need more in this world is Christians that have high skill sets, that are very creative, that can bring, that can turn the head of the world, basically, because I knew that entertainment was impactful. I knew that, pop culture was becoming more and more impactful too in our society. So to create animation that had better moral values to it than what I saw Disney doing, that had characters that kids could really relate to. That's what I was looking for. So I started Tenacious Family Entertainment.
So can I just comment, Tenacious, which is a play on the word tenacious. And I guess cartoon.
Yeah, cartoon and tenacious, correct.
Yeah. So you started that, and a little bit like VeggieTales, maybe. I mean, VeggieTales, highly moral.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it for a long time. I can't remember how much explicit faith is in VeggieTales. Do you want to be explicit occasionally about your faith? I mean, like your podcast is generally not explicit about your faith, but once in a while you say, hey, we talk about God, we're believers, you're going to hear this once in a while.
And that's really what we wanted to do with Tenacious and the kind of stories we told, the characters we created, was that how we put it was that our characters exist in a faith-based world, a world that there is a God and that people do have faith. And so therefore they can mention a Bible verse in their, in their activities during the day. If they're struggling with something, another kid could mention a Bible verse or pray for them.
Right.
And that's the world that we wanted to make it seem natural, just organic. Right. It wasn't like somebody got on a soapbox and started preaching. We see that way too much in Christian content. That's not entertaining. That turns people off. And so we were just trying to create characters that had a core of faith and understanding of God and the Bible, and that would come into play in the stories and the lessons learned that they would always have.
It would, in other words, their faith would express itself maybe vaguely as a carpenter's faith or a construction worker's faith or a truck driver's faith.
Yeah, it was more relational.
Would express itself now and again. He's not talking about it all the time, but it's going to happen because it's what's in you comes out of you, right?
That's for sure. And that's very much in tone with what VeggieTales was doing too. I mean, they had songs in VeggieTales that were really super silly,
Yes.
About where's my hairbrush and things like that. So you can't say that
they didn't have hands, so
yeah,
it would be kind of hard to brush your hair.
And yet it was so impactful. VeggieTales is one of those things. And here I am speaking like I'm Phil Vischer. You'll have to have Phil on the podcast to talk about how he created VeggieTales. But he's a good friend of mine. Even though we were somewhat competitive when I first joined the Christian market doing Lenny and Sid and some of our stories and videos that we created. Yeah, it was a tough time though. I mean, that's really what happened was I left Disney. I gave up the house, the car. I mean, leaving Disney.
You believed in what you were doing. You poured your savings, your life. You risked everything. We sold everything.
We risked everything, put it all on the line. And from a world's point of view, it was a dismal failure because we lost everything. We lost the house and the car. And I tell people all the time, it was poor timing on our behalf because we finished our business plan, went out looking for money, and 2 days later, 9/11 happened. Yeah. So that gives you some perspective of where the world was at. Nobody was putting money and financing into animating faith-based cartoons. That became the hardest business to be in. And then on top of it, the housing market bubble popped a couple years later. We lost our house and we were in foreclosure. We had bankruptcy. And I had gone from, in really 5 years, being at the top of my animation game at Disney and being at one of the lowest points financially, emotionally, but not spiritually, but financially and emotionally. I was drained by the time we closed the doors 7 years later on Tunacious. And yet through the whole journey, I never gave up the understanding and the deep, impactful truth that God had shown me during that journey, that in all things he was going to be there. It didn't matter about the fortunes. It didn't matter about the cars and the houses or whatever it was. He provided for us every step of the way. My kids always had food on the table. We always had a roof over our head. He proved himself worthy of being the great God that he is and worthy of my constant faith. And I can't tell you how deeply, Dan, my faith changed during that journey. I mean, I didn't give up on God. It was the opposite. I got closer to God. My wife and I got closer together in our relationship. My kids and our family grew closer together because we bound together like never before.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
It was, like you said before, it really is. It was one of those most tragic and difficult times in my life, and yet so good, such a blessing when I look back at what happened to us during that journey. And then coming out of it, God has used all of that to his glory and a betterment of my life. And we're now moving to Tennessee and we're buying a house. And I mean, it's like things have really turned around.
Can I just pause you for a second?
Sorry, I got going a little fast there.
No, yeah, right. So, this is, it's fun to hear your story. But, I want to edify our listeners. So obviously, I just want to comment and say, when hardship comes our way, some people turn against. I mean, hypothetically, your wife could have said, I told you this was a giant mistake. And you go, well, why did you ever tell me that? I don't remember, like one time out of 400 conversations, you said it, rah, rah, rah. And sometimes people decide God abandoned them in these moments. And in God's providence and through your faith, your reliance on God, you didn't take that turn against each other, but toward each other, and not away from the Lord, but toward the Lord. Mm-hmm. You also were employable. I mean, you gained a lot of skills. So I know you're a professor now, and I know you're going to move to Tennessee. So I guess you're leaving Azusa Pacific University.
I am. I'm going to be heading to Lipscomb University, which is
where your brother is.
Where my brother is, exactly.
Oh, cool.
So we've been apart for most of our professional careers. Either he's been in Florida or Chicago, and I've stayed in California the whole time. So this is a big transition for me. This is a big life change.
Before I do that, from Tunacious, what did you do immediately afterward? You went to become a professor? You've worked on things like Space Jam.
Yeah, I spent about 10 years being a freelancer. I didn't want to start my own company anymore. I didn't want to be responsible for employees. That was the last thing I was looking for. But I did need to work, and I started really freelancing, going back to what I loved, which was animation, 2D animation. And so I'd work on commercials, and I directed projects. I worked on a computer animated film called Animal Crackers that came out last year, in 2020, right in the height of COVID. It was on Netflix. And so I've directed, I've produced, I've done animation, I've done character designs, a lot of odd jobs here and there sometimes, and some more high profile here and there. I worked with the Beatle, Paul McCartney, on developing a feature that he had for a little while. Now, see, a lot of people would say, "What? You worked with Paul McCartney?" That's pretty nice. I know. It was pretty surreal, to tell you the truth. Short-lived, unfortunately. The feature itself, it didn't quite have legs, but it was a great experience. Yeah. So I've done all kinds of kind of oddball things, and then I was looking for a little bit more structure, certainly financially, to my life too. So that's when I started looking at teaching, which at first I went kicking and screaming. I had always kind of thought, there's that age-old adage of, those who can't do, teach. And I never wanted to be seen that way. And so I put up my own walls of restriction. My own ego got in the way of, for years, just saying, no, I'm too good for that, or I don't want to do that. Maybe when I retire and whatever.
But while you were teaching, you were still drawing, right? I mean,
I was. I am. Yeah. I mean, I'm currently teaching 2-3 days a week, 2.5 days a week, I'll say. And the rest of the week, I'm working on a Disney project, believe it or not. I'm animating on a feature that's going to be coming out next year. Or I worked on Space Jam, or A New Legacy, or I worked on, Mary Poppins Returns. Anything that has any kind of 2D hand-drawn animation in it, I've probably worked on in the last couple years. I will say that, people ask me all the time, oh, how can you be a Christian and work in that dark arena of making movies and, even in animation, there's this and that. Well, to me, I feel like animation has always been the safest place to be for a Christian. And I say safe because we're basically making family content. And yes, Disney has a different definition. Sony has a different definition of what family content is. But you're usually in an arena that's, somewhere in the PG area, and it is very pretty safe. There's good moral values, and the characters always have good outcomes that are positive from at least a worldly perspective. So if
you do the right thing, things tend to work out. Yeah. Sort of perspective.
Yeah. So I haven't had too many conflicts, as a Christian.
When people, so I've been part of this conversation many times. Not that I. Because I consult. I was a pastor for many years. Yeah. And then a professor a little bit more, but people often say, how can so-and-so, how can I stay in, working for Microsoft or, I don't know, Google or Facebook or the military or the administration, Democratic Republic, whichever one I disapprove of. How can I possibly work for that? And I say, hey, if you don't like it now, imagine what would happen if all the Christians were gone.
That's point one. Yeah.
But the other one is, you do have to leave sometimes. And, Joseph worked for one Pharaoh because he could do good. And Moses did not work for another Pharaoh because he couldn't do good, because he was genocidal.
Yeah.
And, I'm reflecting back on your decisions and the course of your entire career, how you use your gifts. You always have to ask, am I staying here just for the personal benefit? I've got safety, security, fame,
401k. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Versus, am I doing good? The kind of good I believe God wants me to do with my skill set and my experience. And by the way, also the mentors that gave themselves to you. Right? You got to honor that too.
Yeah. And that has been largely how I think about my career too. And I mostly look back and I feel so incredibly blessed with the path that God has had me on. Like I said, even the difficult days of Tenacious, even at the worst of those, I still was thanking God for the opportunity to be there and to take another day on working to the benefit of His glory through everything that we were producing there. So that was great. And yet I have fun working on Space Jam, a new legacy, and I get and that has, bigger brand name attachment to it. And so people are impressed when I talk about it. But really, it just gives me a platform then, and same with social media. It's all there to give me a platform, basically, so I can talk about how God has interacted in my life, how the touch points that I can obviously say as God-driven and led. And that really helps other people that are non-Christians that haven't accepted Christ. They start to see that in their own lives. Because I think that's one of the things we could do best as Christians is talk about the presence of God in our lives and how we acknowledge it, how we see it, and how we can talk about it. I mean, that's how we can really excite people about what it is to be a Christian, is that we can actually talk about our own firsthand experience of God moments. And I think that's exciting.
On your podcast, if I can commend your podcast again to people who are interested in the arts, you dig into questions that sort of work on the topic of how God made us. Like, can I just ask you to give me a 1-minute riff on introvert extrovert, which is one of you had an episode on that. So some people, I could never be an animator. I'm an extrovert. I can't sit in a room and just draw stuff all day.
Yeah, and it is true that most artists, and I see this now day to day, being a professor of college students, they're very introverted, and we're coming through a time now. The world is changing where everybody's been online for years now through COVID and such, and I see students and people of that age that are college age, they don't know how to relate. They don't know how to relate to each other or to their teachers, and they're having to kind of relearn a lot of things that we take for granted because of our different childhood. But they're mostly all introverted. I mean, I would say like 80% at least are.
But you can be an extroverted animator, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those tend to be the leaders because they're not the ones that are afraid to speak up in a meeting. And you can really tell, like in the Disney structure of, creative management, those are the ones that are applauded. Those are the ones that are rewarded the most, are the ones that they say, give good meeting, or they say, be good in the room. That's the Disney saying. Are they good in the room? And that tends to be the extroverts. And yet we've always looked at how introverts are looked down upon in society as being quiet and something wrong with them. They're misfits, right?
I mean, the introverts are, in other fields, they're the inventors.
Yep.
They just keep trying to make this surface for a playground or a better screwdriver or something. Yeah. And they don't care that they're not talking to anybody. I mean, we would be so desperately impoverished. And I'm guessing the projects you worked on, I'm guessing most of the people who created the characters, by created the characters, I don't mean just drew them, but you talk also about creating characters.
Yeah.
First you visualize who they are, what they're going to do, then you draw them. But most of those people have got to be introverts.
Most of them are, absolutely. And yet they can create characters that are not like them. And I think that's the joy of being a creative introvert, is that I can be, Superman if I created him, or if I created another superhero or something like that. I can be larger than life. I can save people. I could be, a great orator or singer or rock star, anything my imagination can set part to. I could be that in a way. And there's something funny that happens as us introverted creatives. I love nothing more than, and my wife will say this too, I love nothing more than just sitting down at the drafting table, my drawing table, and getting lost, and getting in the zone. You've probably experienced this with your writing, right? Where you get in the zone and you don't even know it, but my wife has come in and said, honey, I've been calling you to dinner. And you've been sitting there for 2 hours. Do you realize that? And I'm like,
you
what?
Skipped lunch. Yeah. My favorite is when I've like my stomach hurts, and I'm thinking, why does my stomach hurt? Oh, it's 3:00. I forgot to eat lunch.
Exactly.
Jesus actually says that says something that's akin to that. He said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work.
Yeah.
And I take that to mean that, food is nourishing, but what's really nourishing is to do the will of the Father and to finish the work he gave me.
That's good.
And he says that in John 4. And then in John 19, he says it's finished, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a callback to John 4. And I seriously take that as a license to get engrossed in work and let some things go because you're in the zone.
Yeah.
And it's flowing.
I think so too. And it's kind of my happy place,
Right. If you get flow, right? You get flow at times.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I call it the zone, but and we all call it something different, but it is that place you go where just time stands still, and you're kind of in that moment of creating.
One way to look at it is maybe if somebody tapped you on the shoulder while you're doing it and they said, "Excuse me, sir, what's your name?" You'd almost want to say, "I'll get back to you on that."
Yeah. I'd be like, Tom Bancroft, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go to a bunch of rapid fire questions, okay?
I'm ready.
Question number 1. You're on the elevator going pretty fast from the first floor to the 74th floor. You've got somebody goes, "Are you Tony Bancroft? I want to be an animator. Give me the secret."
Draw every day.
Every day.
It really is, yeah. Most people who love animation, they love it as, that show that I grew up with that I'm very reminiscent about, but they don't know the hard work that goes into it.
Right.
And animation is one of the arduous, most time-consuming and arduous things that you can do, and it takes years and years of experience in drawing to be good at it. So get started, start drawing. If you really love something, put the work in.
Yeah, and poets say, "I try to compose a sonnet before breakfast." Even if it's not any good, there may be something, right? Poets write a sonnet, composers write a song before noon. Even if the song isn't good, there's something there.
I draw Mickey Mouse. I'll start my day by drawing Mickey Mouse.
Do you really?
I do.
Yeah,
I love drawing Mickey Mouse.
Get the fingers moving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. And when people ask me about writing books, I always say, well, be sure to write at least a paragraph every day, even if it's bad.
Yeah.
It's got something good in it, even if you think that's a terrible paragraph. There's some truth in that paragraph, or you wouldn't have written it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That was question number 1. Question number 2. What's your hobby? For most people, drawing or sketching and art is a hobby, but that's not your hobby.
It really is.
What do you do for fun?
I don't do hardly anything except for I'll watch movies and shows. I guess you can call that, but in a way that's research for me. So everything I do and love tends to be related to cartooning, comic strips, animation, watching movies, making movies.
So you're monomaniacal.
Yes.
Yes.
And certainly the maniacal part.
All right. If you could do anything for 1 year,
oh man,
all obstacles removed. You don't have to worry about passports. You don't have to worry about money, about losing your job. What would you do for 1 year?
Tom and I both have a dream of, and I don't know that our podcast is this successful or popular enough, but to take it on the road. I would love to take a year where I'm not working on anything, but Tom and I are just traveling the world, going to different universities and colleges that have animation programs and doing live podcasts and also teaching. But yeah, take a year just to travel with the podcast. That'd be great.
So teaching large audiences, people just interested in animation, but also dropping by the local university.
Yeah.
And giving like your greatest, concentrated wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Don't we all want to do that? I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Probably a fair number of people want to do that, take their show on the road.
Yeah.
5 years from now, what would you like to give thanks for? What would you like to praise God for in 5 years?
I feel like I already have it's probably everything that I'm doing right now, but I don't know. In 5 years, just at the age that I'm at, if I could be praising God about, good health, that would be a wonderful thing, because I do think about that now like I never have before. So
you're not that old.
Yeah.
Most people listening and watch, you're like 50 something. I don't know.
Dan, you're probably older than me, but I think I look twice as old as you. So I appreciate you saying that.
You don't look twice as old as me.
You still got your hair. Good for you.
Well, I've got enough to create an illusion that I have hair. I don't know. What would you like to say? One more word to your listeners, my listeners, our listeners. You want to say one more thing before I say thank you and you get back to your work?
I tell my students all the time, animate from the heart. And that's something that was kind of brought down to me through my mentor. And that may mean a lot of different things for people that aren't into animation, but what I hope it means to anybody that's not an animator themselves is that put your heart into everything. I believe that God wants us as Christians to be excellent and strive for excellence in what we do, because I think that's when the world really listens to us and gives us an ear to our voice. So that's what I would say is, whatever it is, do it to your heart.
Tony Bancroft,
yes,
animator, professor, podcast host, writer of a book about directing, and all kinds of other things. It's been a delight to have you on this podcast.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me. This has been fun. Let's do it again sometime.
All right, let's do it again sometime. Let's agree to that.
Yeah, and I'll come with a drawing of you as a kitty cat.
Okay. That sounds worrisome to me.
It may be.
All right, thanks, Tony. Great to be with you.
Take care.
Thanks again to today's guest, Tony Bancroft. If you want to learn more about the world of animation, be sure to check the Bancroft Brothers, a podcast hosted by Tony and his brother Tom. The link for that is in the show notes for this episode, or you could visit us at workingwithdan.org. At our website, you can explore archives of old episodes, subscribe to receive updates on new episodes, receive giveaways, and find bonus content. This podcast is a production of the Center for Faith and Work in partnership with the Alliance for Confessing Evangelicals. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And one more time, I'm Dan Doriani, reminding you to work hard, make a difference, and from time to time, take a break.